Welcome to Old Rare Files. If you enjoyed the content, please subscribe, become a member, and like our content.
Japanese prisoners entering a detention camp during World War II. After battles in the Pacific, thousands of Japanese soldiers were captured by Allied forces and sent to temporary camps where many faced harsh conditions and long periods of confinement. An Allied military convoy moving through a mountainous region during the Pacific campaign of World War II. Improvised roads and rough terrain made transporting troops and supplies one of the greatest challenges of military operations in the region. Military tent used by Allied soldiers in improvised camps during the Pacific campaign of World War II. In tropical and isolated regions, troops spent weeks living in simple tents surrounded by protective fences and harsh weather conditions. American soldiers organizing their equipment in an improvised military camp during the Pacific campaign of World War II. In tropical regions, troops lived in simple tents while carrying blankets, clothing, and basic supplies after long movements through isolated areas. American soldiers arriving at a fenced military camp during the Pacific campaign of World War II. Many of these improvised camps were built in isolated tropical areas where newly arrived troops rested, organized equipment, and prepared for future operations. Japanese prisoners being escorted into a fenced camp by American soldiers during the Pacific campaign of World War II. After intense fighting across tropical islands, many captured troops were taken to improvised detention areas before being transferred to larger prison camps. Wide view of a prisoner camp surrounded by barbed wire during World War II. Improvised tents housed captured soldiers in tropical Pacific regions where armed guards constantly monitored movements inside the camp. A military mechanic performing maintenance on an American aircraft during World War II. External panels were opened for quick access to the plane's weapons, ammunition, and internal systems, allowing repairs and reloading between combat missions. A damaged American military aircraft after an accident at a Pacific base during World War II. The crash completely destroyed the propeller and front section of the plane, showing how even routine landings and operations could be extremely dangerous in war zones. Two military aircraft collided during operations in the Pacific during World War II. The force of the impact completely destroyed the front section of one aircraft, leaving twisted propellers and crushed fuselage panels. Accidents like this were common on improvised airstrips and during intense combat operations. An American fighter aircraft parked after suffering a serious accident at a Pacific air base during World War II. The upper wing was completely folded over the fuselage after the impact, revealing the constant dangers pilots faced even outside direct combat. Another American military aircraft destroyed after a serious accident at a Pacific air base during World War II. The crash tore off part of the wings and left the aircraft structure completely twisted, highlighting the constant dangers of air operations on improvised runways. American soldiers being transported on a military landing craft near a Pacific base during World War II. Many movements between islands were carried out in small boats under extreme heat, limited protection, and the constant threat of enemy attacks. American soldiers lining up for registration and inspection after arriving at a military base in the Pacific during World War II. Many men spent days traveling by ships and landing craft before being reassigned to new missions on Allied-controlled tropical islands. An elderly couple sitting outside a rural European home during World War II. In many countryside regions, elderly civilians remained in villages devastated by the war, surviving with limited resources while soldiers and battles moved across the continent. American soldiers taking part in a vote organized inside a military camp during World War II. Even far from home and stationed in Pacific combat zones, many servicemen continued exercising their right to vote through improvised polling stations set up inside tents. An American soldier taking an oath while participating in an improvised military voting process during World War II. Even in remote bases and war zones, thousands of servicemen continued voting in U.S. elections through polling stations set up inside tents and military camps. European civilians carrying luggage and personal belongings while passing through an area controlled by Allied soldiers during World War II. Millions of people were displaced by the war, fleeing destroyed cities, military occupations, and fighting that devastated much of Europe. Civilians watched the entrance of a Soviet-controlled camp after the Allied advance during World War II. The large communist symbol above the gate represents the influence and control of the Soviet Union in occupied areas of Eastern Europe after the collapse of Nazi rule. Refugees and displaced civilians endure the harsh winter while traveling along a snow-covered road during World War II. Many families fled the fighting in Eastern Europe carrying only carts, bicycles, and a few belongings, trying to escape advancing armies and the devastation caused by the war. A French mother and her children prepared to leave their town during the winter of World War II. With only a few belongings loaded into an improvised cart, thousands of civilian families were forced to abandon their homes to escape fighting, bombings, and advancing armies across occupied Europe. German refugees carry suitcases, blankets, and children as they flee their homes during the Allied advance in 1945. In the final months of World War II, millions of civilians desperately escaped combat zones, enduring cold, hunger, and long journeys in search of safety. A woman emotionally embraces a returning soldier while a child smiles as he steps off a bus during a reunion after World War II. Thousands of families were separated for years by the conflict, and scenes like this became symbols of the war's end and the long-awaited return home. A mother carries her young daughter while walking along a dirt road during the civilian displacement at the end of World War II. Millions of families were forced to leave their homes, traveling long distances in search of safety after years of conflict and destruction across Europe. Evacuated German civilians watch an artillery battery during the Battle of Kirpin in the final months of World War II. Many families became trapped between the front lines as entire towns were devastated by Allied advances and constant bombardments across German territory. American soldiers wait to board a military transport ship at the port of Noumea, New Caledonia in 1942. Thousands of troops passed through Pacific bases before heading into brutal combat against Japan during World War II. Residents watch American tanks moving through a German town during the final months of World War II. In many parts of Germany, civilians gathered in the streets to witness the arrival of Allied forces as war-damaged cities were finally occupied. An elderly man works inside a traditional rural mill, using simple tools to grind grain by hand. During the early 20th century, many farmers still relied on manual methods and small family-run structures to produce flour and survive in remote areas. A Melanesian sailor from New Caledonia stands guard outside French Navy headquarters in Noumea during World War II. Colonial troops and local soldiers played an important role in defending French territories in the Pacific, especially after Japanese expansion across the region. An American soldier uses natural cover in tropical vegetation during military exercises in the Pacific during World War II. Jungle warfare demanded intense training, adaptation to extreme weather, and camouflage techniques to survive in dense and dangerous terrain. Russian refugees displaced by World War II spend time playing checkers inside a temporary shelter managed by American civil affairs units in 1944. Thousands of families removed from occupied territories lived in barracks and improvised camps while waiting for relocation and humanitarian aid. A Russian mother and her 2 refugee daughters wait in Luxembourg to return to their homeland after the end of World War II. Millions of displaced families remain stranded far from home for years, living in temporary camps and relying on international aid to survive. American soldiers celebrate alongside European civilians during the final months of World War II. In many newly liberated towns, spontaneous gatherings inside train stations and shelters mark the end of years of occupation, fear, and separation from family and friends. European refugees and civilians board a snow-covered train during the winter of World War II. Thousands of families fled ruined cities carrying only suitcases, blankets, and a few belongings, while Allied soldiers assisted with evacuations and the reorganization of liberated areas. An American soldier gives candy to a small Ukrainian girl during the final months of World War II. In many liberated towns across Eastern Europe, children who had grown up surrounded by war experienced their first contact with Allied soldiers through small acts of kindness, food, and protection. An American sergeant helps a Russian former prisoner liberated from a German labor camp near the end of World War II. Thousands of forced laborers and foreign prisoners were discovered in terrible conditions as Allied forces advanced across occupied Europe in 1945. Russian displaced children travel with their families after being removed from refugee centers in Europe near the end of World War II. Thousands of civilians lost their homes and crossed the continent carrying only a few belongings while trying to rebuild their lives after years of occupation and war. Soviet civilians, including many children, take part in a public ceremony organized after World War II in territories retaken by the Red Army. Events like this were used to celebrate victory over Nazi Germany and reinforce the Soviet Union's political and social rebuilding after the war. Children displaced by World War II watch a May Day celebration at a refugee camp in occupied Germany in 1946. Millions of families were left homeless after the war, and many camps housed Soviet and Eastern European civilians while they awaited repatriation or resettlement. A Russian refugee is assisted by American soldiers after rescuing a wounded tank crewman from a burning tank during the final months of World War II. Amid the chaos of war, civilians often risk their own lives to save soldiers trapped in destroyed vehicles or enemy fire zones. A Russian orphan boy is taken in by American soldiers of the 29th Infantry Division during the final months of World War II. Thousands of children were left alone after the fighting in Eastern Europe, and some were temporarily cared for by Allied military units while searching for relatives or safe shelter. An American sergeant speaks with two liberated Russian forced laborers in Germany in 1945. Millions of civilians from Eastern Europe were taken by the Nazi regime to work in German factories and farms during the war. After liberation, many waited for aid, documents, and transportation to return to their home countries. German civilians and an American soldier read a newspaper together shortly after the end of the war in Europe in 1945. In many liberated cities, civilians searched for news about the fall of Berlin, the Soviet advance, and the fate of relatives missing during the final months of the conflict. 4 liberated Russian women salute after the end of German occupation during World War II. Many women from Eastern Europe were forced to accompany German troops to perform cooking, cleaning, and laundry duties far from their home countries. Liberation marked the beginning of a long effort to rebuild their lives after years of war and displacement.